Good afternoon. I am Gediminas Urbonas, professor in Art, Culture and Technology program here at MIT, and co-founder with Naudé Urbonas of Urbonas Studio and interdisciplinary research practice. Thank you for joining us today for this momentous occasion. We are privileged to have our distinguished guests and speakers over the next 2 days to honor artist and professor of practice, Antoni Muntadas, who will retire at the end of this academic year. The artists, architects, and scholars convened here for the symposium and exhibition represent the influence of Muntadas. They grapple with the paradox of public space and producing art and architecture and everything in between, in the ever-shifting definitions of urban, public, and art. It has been a great pleasure to work with Muntadas for the past 5 years. This semester and with Seminar Studio and over the past 6-7 months to organize the symposium. I would like to take the time now to thank our team in organizing the symposium and exhibition. Marielle Villery, Anne Louis, Jonathan Chrisman, Gina Badger, exhibition research and design team, Naudé Urbonas, Fabio Ceravella, Andrew Ferentinos, Eddie Hollander, and Ana Cristina Vargas. Art, Culture and Technology Program Coordination Support with Marianne Cunningham, Laura Anka Chichisan, Lucas Spivey, Seth Avesila, and Madeline Gallagher. Thanks to our colleagues, Azra Akshamiya, Oliver Lutz, James Paradis, Greg Tucker, Rafi Segal, Shona McCarthy, Elizabeth Murphy, and Stacy Pyron. And our donors and supporters, Adèle, Naudé Santos, Lila Kinney, Nader Tehrani, Ivan Ziporin, Susan Cohen, Yoichi Ito, Renee Green, Ether Zuckerman, and James Paradis. This program was made possible by funding provided by CAST, School of Architecture and Planning, Dean's Office, the Architecture Department, ACT, CAMIT, Comparative Media Studies, Center for Civic Media, and the Media Lab. I will now hand it over to Dean of the School of Architecture and Planning, Adèle Santos, to welcome you all, followed by Lila Kinney, Executive Director of Arts Initiative at MIT, who has generously supported this project with CAST funding. Thank you.
Thanks, Gediminas. So, this is a wonderful occasion, by the way, and it's seldom that I address an audience where I know so many of you. It's great that this is, thanks to Muntadas and all his connections and the people's respect for him, this brought a fantastic crowd of people here today. So I think public space lost and found is obviously, you can see in big letters, and this is in honor of Muntadas. And he's been an important figure, needless to say, in the history of art, culture, and technology at MIT. I think in talking in this introduction, one's inevitably has to refer a bit to the history of art actually on this campus, and in particular as part of the School of Architecture, which I think most of you know is the oldest school in the country. We were part of the founding of this institution. There were 4 disciplines, and architecture was one of them. And so we've been really embedded in the psyche and practically of this institution. And over the years, architecture developed into a series of focus groups, if you will, academically. And ACT, as it's now known, Art, Culture, and Technology, is one of them. I think it's actually, the program is incredibly important because not only is it an academic program and a research center, but it really facilitates artists, thinkers, exploration of art in a broad, complex way through history, in conjunction with the culture, the science, and the technology that are all part and parcel of this institution. So for us, it's a pretty precious, although small, part of what we do. I think ACT, as it's known today, is really is a combination of the former Center for Advanced Visual Studies, which was established in 1967 by Kepish, and the Visual Arts Program established in 1989. And it's our privilege today to have Otto Pine, who's going to open tomorrow's session, who was the first fellow at the MIT Center for Advanced Visual Studies. Kepish actually succeeded Georgi Kappas and was its director until retiring in 1994. Then later this afternoon, we'll hear from Krzysztof Radichko, who revitalized the CAVS program and included creating a visual artist program and a strong focus on transdisciplinary production and embedded in MIT's science and technological community. That was a very important period. Dennis Adams, I think hope he's still here, is here, was the head of VAP for 2 years, 1999 to 2001. And then another session will be moderated by Ute Mette-Bauer, who was appointed director of the Visual Arts Program in the summer of 2005. And under her stewardship, the program actually increased in size, and both the undergraduate and the graduate components of it. The student labs expanded. The program organized a really highly visible a lecture series on Monday nights, which is amazing. And then she became the founding director of ACT, which was really the merger of these different, rather too small groups of CAVS and VAP. And this also coincided with the move into the Media Lab building, which I think was really important, taking it from a very obscure location down the street and to kind of being in the epicenter, if you will, of the things that we do here. So Muntadas, of course, he's part of all of this. Yes. And he came to MIT in 1977. It's hard to believe it, but he hung in here. And then was part of the incarnation of this new development called ACT in 2010. And his work as a teacher and practitioner kind of offers a really unique lens onto the kind of cross-sectional history of what happened here at this institution. I think through his works, he addressed the social, political, and communication issues, such as the relationship between public and private space within social networks, which will be obviously the first panel we're going to kick off. It was during his time at CAVS that he coined the term media landscape to define the ever-expanding presence of mass media, audiovisual material, and advertisements in the public space and its dialogue. I think on translation, which is certainly how most of us knew him or know him, was a really growing body of work that was really pretty important. And each work in the series is diverse from all the others in terms of content, dimensions, materials, and so on, and they all focus on the author's personal experience. And he grouped these together under this name, and I think it's really important. Actually, part of the teaching, because each year Muntadas took a group of students to different parts of the world where they engaged in a very rich experience, culturally speaking. By the way, they were all multicultural anyway. They came from all different parts of the world, and they weren't all in the art program or the architecture program. They came from all over because this was such an exciting opportunity to be with him. And they really looked at the cultural issues of our time, the role of the artist in art and contemporary society, and they were richly rewarded, frankly, by the kinds of contacts that Muntadas made and the experiences they had. This seminar was a real staple of our offerings at ACT every spring, and people at Harvard fought to get in here. We couldn't have too many places for them, and it was really extraordinary what he did. And so now we have, in this process, Gediminas will actually be the one to continue this work, and he, in fact, is working right now with Muntadas on this last episode in Doha. Doha, where else? And Qatar. It got more exotic, I may add, as time progressed, right? And I'm sorry that I wasn't with the class, because it could have been a completely extraordinary thing. So the symposium, in a way, functions really as a translation of teaching to practice, between media and art, architecture, and planning, and between cultural contexts. So it's sort of reliving what actually his work here, teaching in the school, has really meant. And I think we'll start with the public-private spaces, cultural identity and context. What is public space? How do we identify it through cultural, historical, and socio-political contexts? That'll be the first panel. And I think Muntadas himself will put forth his notions of identity and culture with respect to artistic practices. Then we'll have reclaiming public space, surveillance and control, which seems to be a very interesting topic, and quite provocative, looking at reclaiming private space across scales and levels of permanence. The work will be presented, provoke ideas of marginalization, and complicates the issue of what is public infrastructure. Then the alternatives of contemporary public space, the interdisciplinary praxis, would include issues of beyond the narrow focus. How does a planner, the architect, or the artist operate in public space at the moment that these disciplinary boundaries are wavering and nearly dissolving? And that's kind of an interesting question, because, as we all know, these boundaries have been eroding for quite a while now, and so there is a kind of fluidity amongst different kinds of practice. And then speculations on the future of urban space, utopia. Whoa, utopia meaning both good place and no place. So I'm sorry, I'm going to miss this one. It sounds very interesting. And then finally, public space research projects and production. And this is where the former students of Muntadas will tell us how their work has evolved out of the process of being engaged with you and your work. So this is very rich. So, sorry, my voice has got this cold. It's ridiculous. But I just do want to kind of end with what I think is really exciting. If we look back at this whole program of the arts, from ACT onwards, honestly, it started off as a who's who, of art practices in the very beginning. And, as certainly in terms of all the people who've been involved here, it's been truly extraordinary. And, and one measure, of course, is the Venice Biennale. So, of course, Muntadas represented his country, Spain, and Christoph, wherever you are, he represented his country. They were in Poland. And then Gediminas represented his country, Lithuania. And then Young Ho Chang, who was in architecture, but he represented his country, China, curating the first Chinese pavilion. And now we have Joan Jonas, as I think you all know by now, is going to represent the United States in Venice. So, it's hard to imagine any place having a better history than this one. It's completely extraordinary.
And Elora also represented.
Elora, oh, there she is, right, of course, that's right. Right. No, so, I have to congratulate everybody involved with this. It's been it's one of my favorite parts of the school, and I've tried to support it as much as I can in the time I've been here. And it's no secret that I'm stepping down as dean in a couple of months. And so I hand over this to my colleague here, Doris, and moving forward. So this is going to be a fantastic love fest, I think. And thank you for being here. This is really exciting.
Thank you, Adèle, and I really have to say, what a way to go out with a flourish as a dean with this kind of record. So I'm Leela Kinney, as Gediminas said, and I'm the Executive Director of Arts Initiatives here and also of the Center for Arts, Science, and Technology, which is, I'll tell you a tiny bit about, and also invite you to another symposium in September that I hope you'll attend. First, since we're talking about history, I just want to say that this Mellon-founded initiative is, in part, stands on the shoulders of this great legacy, this great tradition, at MIT, starting with CAVS, and then with another episode, which was very significant, I think, in terms of finding a public space, which is also about finding a community here at MIT, and that was the Festival of Art, Science, and Technology in 2011, which was in large part spearheaded by the School of Architecture and Planning, with early support from Adèle, leadership from Todd Mackover, and Meejin Yoon's actual curation of the campus as a kind of space of installations, really a series of 22 pop-up installations. The School of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences then joined in to this semester-long celebration. We had concerts, performances, symposia. We literally found and curated this creative arts community that we have here. So the center, which Adèle and the Dean of the School of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences, Deborah Fitzgerald, and Philip Curry, the Associate Provost with responsibility for the arts, spearheaded with us, was an attempt to create an infrastructure to maintain this great sort of creative activity around campus, and in particular also to make sure that the arts were embedded in the very structure of this institution, primarily known for science and engineering, with also, of course, this great legacy in art and architecture. So what do? We seed cross-disciplinary courses. We bring in visiting artists to make sure they're embedded in the curriculum and in collaborative research and projects with our faculty and students here, and we have the great privilege to sponsor to help bring about symposia activities like this. So I'm very honored, really, to be part of this. Briefly, next September 26 and 27 will be our first of a biennial symposia here, in which we plan to bring together artists, scientists, and humanists, and architectural historians, scholars. The theme of this one will be Seeing, Sounding, Sensing. Each session will have an artist, many members of our cognitive science faculty here. We have two institutes, the Pickauer and the McGovern, that study cognitive sciences, and artists, architectural historians, architectural historians, scholars, humanists. Our STS program, Science, Technology, and Society, will also participate. I hope you'll be able to join us. The timing is very similar to this one. It starts at 2 p.m. on September 26th, which is a Friday. We'll have a keynote speaker, Bruno Latour, that evening, who many of you may know is an eminent historian, philosopher of science, and then we will continue through Saturday. We'll also be very fortunate to have the pioneer musician, Alvin Lucier, here, who will culminate the symposium with a performance, in which will include his sort of legendary work, I Am Sitting in a Room, where he very early on used his brain waves to create a work of, I wouldn't even call it music, but whatever we want to call it, was really a pioneering work. So I hope you'll join us for that. And without further ado, let's enjoy this symposium now. Thank you.
Thank you, Adèle. Thank you, Lila. So we will start with the first panel. As you can see in your program, Private Public Spaces, Cultural Identity and Context, moderated by Meejin Yoon, professor and director of the undergraduate program in architecture and incoming head of the Department of Architecture. Meejin will introduce the speakers: Ina Blom, Oslo University; Antoni Muntadas, ACT MIT; Néstor García Canclini, UAM, Iztapalapa, Mexico. The speakers will each present for 20 minutes, and our respondents, Doris Sommer from Harvard University, and Ana Maria León from History, Theory, and Criticism, MIT, will give their impressions, followed by a roundtable discussion and Q&A. Please keep presentations, responses, and questions sharp so that we can stay on schedule and respect each of the speakers today in both the first and second sessions. Thank you.
Thank you. I have the great honor of introducing the first panel, which is on private public spaces, cultural identity and context. And I wanted to just show 2 slides in the introduction of the panel. And this is a piece that I'm sure everyone in this room is familiar with. I first came across it as a very innocent undergraduate at Cornell. And it's the following piece by Vito Acconci. And in this piece, which was commissioned by the Architectural League of New York, which occurred in October of 1969, over a 3-week period, Vito engaged in this public-private, what we would call an architecture mapping of the urban landscape. And so he would follow people in public space, and as that person moved into private space, he would wait until the next person and follow that person through public space. And that was the choreography of the piece. And as an architect, or as an architecture student at that time, I found this piece somewhat comforting. I thought maybe I understood conceptual art, and that architecture, which is or the medium in which we traffic, which is space, was maybe not so different from that of the conceptual artist, so I thought. What Muntadas does is he destabilized my medium, the medium of architecture and space, through a critical art practice that makes us think beyond space to translation, transmission, signal, dialogue, and communication. And little did I know as a student that 10 years later, I would be sitting in Muntadas' studio just south of Canal Street, where he offered me a glass of water and some bread. And to this day, I still don't know if that was also a conceptual art project. So Muntadas has helped me, and I think many across the world, recalibrate our thinking about the relationship between public space through the lens of communication. His lifelong work comments on media, communication, and culture, and especially how we perceive the world. And he asks us to rethink our understanding of the ordinary, the accepted, and the everyday in our public spaces and in the public sphere. The speakers in this first panel, I will read the bios in sequence. First is Ina Blom, who is a professor of the Department of Philosophy and Classics, History of Art and Ideas at the University of Oslo. Her fields of research are modernism, avant-garde studies, and contemporary art, with a particular focus in art, media, and technology. A former music critic, she has also worked extensively as an art critic and curator, contributing to Art Forum, After All, Parquet, Frieze, and her most recent writings include On the Style Site, Art, Sociality, and Television Culture, as well as the autobiography of video in Critical Inquiry. She's currently working on a book project entitled The Autobiography of Video, Life and Times of Memory and Technology. So Antoni Muntadas, who I had the privilege of meeting 10 years ago, and we took a group of students to Brasilia. And it was a shared studio, and I was because I was a junior faculty, I was very nervous about the fact that, we're taking students to Brasilia, and nervous things would happen, and, worried about, not a curfew, but just conscious of every time the door opened and closed, 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m. Little did I know, Muntadas was partying with the students, and they were all very safe. So Muntadas, as you know, is an artist and educator born in Barcelona. He's lived in New York since '71, and he came to MIT in '77 to join the Center for Advanced Visual Studies. In this experimental setting, he explored topics such as the media landscape and the dichotomies between subjectivity and objectivity and public and private. He works on projects in different media, such as photography, video, publications, the internet. And in '95, Muntadas grouped together a set of works and projects titled On Translation, of which this warning piece is part of. Their content, dimensions, and materials are highly diverse, and they focus on the author's personal experience and artistic activity in numerous countries over a period of 30 years. By grouping such works together, Muntadas places them within a body of experience and concrete concerns regarding communication, the culture of our times, and the role of the artist and art in contemporary society. He is currently a very beloved professor of practice here at ACT. Néstor García Canclini is an Argentinian-born academic and anthropologist known for his theorization in the concept of hybridity. Currently, his research focuses on the relationship between aesthetics, art, anthropology, creative strategies, and cultural networks, a society without a published story to date. He received his PhD in philosophy, and he has taught at the University of Austin, Duke, Stanford, Barcelona, Buenos Aires, and São Paulo, and currently works in Mexico City. He received a Guggenheim Fellowship and has been recognized widely. His books include Hybrid Culture, published by the University of Minnesota Press in 1995, and he is the recipient of the first Ibero-American Book Award for the best book about Latin America. We have two amazing respondents to the first panel. We have Doris Sommer, Director of Cultural Agents Initiative at Harvard University. She's the Ira and Jewel Williams Professor of Romance Languages and Literature and of African American Studies. Her academic and outreach work promotes development through arts and humanities, specifically through pre-texts in Boston Public Schools throughout Latin America and beyond. Pre-Text is an arts-based training program for teachers of literacy, critical thinking, and citizenship. Among her books are foundational fictions, the national romances of Latin America, and novels that help to consolidate new republics. Proceed with caution when engaged by minority literature. Sommer has enjoyed and is dedicated to developing a great public education. Ana Maria León is a PhD candidate here in our HTC program, and her research focuses on the intersection between modernity, pedagogy, and politics in art and architecture, and she traces the transnational networks of intellectual exchange between Europe and the Americas. Her research has been published in journals including Log, Thresholds, Plot, JAE. She recently edited Thresholds 41, Revolution, and turns to the history, design, and cultural production of the public realm as a site of dissensus. And we'll start with Ina Blom.
Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for this lovely invitation to honor Antoni Muntadas. And I'm going to use this occasion to speak about a topic, a historical case study, very much from the period where Muntadas started out, the late 60s, early 70s, early video art, the video pioneers. And this is a, thank you, this is a case study which outlines a reconceptualization of the very notion of the private/public space called television. And this reconceptualization took place the moment what we may call the real-time flow model of the global mediascape a model that was very influential for not least critics of television since the early 1960s. This model was challenged by a biologically informed model of televisual technologies that opened for a different understanding of televisual subjectivity and social ontology in the TV age. So I think this works. Okay, great. So in the beginning was feedback. I think it would be hard to find a vignette that more accurately pinpoints the belief, widely shared among the video artists and activists gathering around Radical Software magazine in the early 1970s, that there was something very fundamental or even foundational about video, something to do not just with techniques and media, but with biological reality, the very forces of life. Yet this statement did not come from these quarters. It was the opening line of a 1984 article in Physica journal, written by James P. Crutchfield, who was at the time a research physicist with very close connections to the video art pioneers in general, and I think he particularly collaborated with Steiner and Woody Wasolka. Now, in this text, video feedback was presented as a space-time simulator, or more precisely, as a space-time analog computer that made it possible to understand a number of problems in dynamical systems theory, such as iterative image processing, cellular automata, and biological morphogenesis. So video feedback could, in other words, for Crutchfield, work as a cheap and fast simulator of the type of complex behavior that was at the time being introduced as a possible model for the very dynamics of life. So this was at a time when he didn't have a big enough computer to create this simulation, so he thought that video could somehow give an inkling of what this might be. So it seemed to him to model the way in which processes of emergence might be seen as a function of what second-order systems theory calls operational closure. In this particular case, the ongoing individuation of a technical system in its complex processing of matter. Now, this was a perspective that anchored in precise technical terms the more nebulous or intuitive ideas that were underpinning the widespread associations between video and life issues, as well as the animist intuition that video was a sort of living being of some sorts. So it was a perspective that displaced the too rapid identification between life and televisual liveness or flow that had become a key tenet of the televisual imaginary. In a letter to social philosopher William Irving Thompson, Avery Johnson, who was at the time a neurophysiology researcher at MIT, who was also in close dialogue with the radical software circle of video pioneers, complained about a critique of TV culture that Thompson had published in the June 10, 1976 issue of the New York Times. In this article, Thompson deplored a televisual paradigm that expands around the world spatially, but that conflates everything with the present and the codes of presentation. Now, the gist of this critique was that the televisual present destroys not just history, but also a productive imagination of the future. And Thompson's critique of television's formatting of the public sphere echoed, I think, the terms of nearly every critic of television, from Rudolf Arnhem and Jean-Paul Sartre to Raymond Williams. All used the concept of televisual liveness and flow as the point of departure for their analysis, to the extent that it's almost become like a metaphysical horizon beyond which the thinking of television could not go. However, Avery Johnson turned the very terms of this critique against Thompson himself, attacking him for having written a text that intellectually reflects what you deplore in TV, making past and future meld into an instant world which obliterates memory. Yet the memory loss identified by Johnson was of a different order than Thompson's concern for historical memory and the cultural archives of the past. Since Johnson was concerned with memory in the more biological sense of the word, and since the introduction of molecular biology, the capacity for memory, the physical preservation of the past in the present, that's the very condition of the survival of genetic traits, has notably been established as that which defines life and that separates it from the non-living. At least it's a provisional attempt to define life in memory terms. And it was preoccupation with this concept of memory, a biological concept of memory, that made Johnson state that the critical obsession with the televisual present does not recognize us, inhabitants of TV culture, as biological organisms that can actually move and struggle. So his advice to Thompson was therefore to engage with the work of the biologically oriented half-inch port-pack video freaks. In fact, videos distancing of both television and the kind of cultural critique it tended to produce was an all-important factor in the emergence of an entirely new understanding of publicness and political action. Focus on totalizing TV presence too easily views individual bodies as passive relays in a global electronic world, a global electronic network. Yet to Johnson, biological bodies are never passive relays, but independent capacities for action. Hence, television must be understood in terms of its specific ways of interacting with such centers of action. So a new concept of video life, highly tenuous of course, but still, opened onto the analogies and complicities between the technical particularities of video systems and the dynamics of living systems. Once the agencies of video became part of new unruly composites, freed from the strictures of broadcasting institutions that had adopted televisual technologies as a way of adding images to radio, video seemed to rethink the televisual public sphere of liveness and flow. Now, I'm sure that all of you are familiar with the more metaphorical or rhetorical presentations of video live. For instance, Nam June Park's live TV fish or TV gardens, TV skies, etc. Yet I think a more systematic exploration of the social ontologies of video life happened in the context of the nascent environmental politics of the 1960s and 70s. That is in an atmosphere of risk, crisis, urgency, and failure, in which it seemed that biological life could for the first time no longer simply be taken for granted. At this point, water, at once the primary medium for biological life and the established metaphor or signifier for televisual flow, came to highlight the critical question of how to understand social memory or collective memory in modern information culture. Since video was doubly in sympathy with water, so to speak, water also became the medium through which it could reconfigure the role of perception and memory in the public sphere. On the one hand, the constant association between video and water evoked the distracted or memoryless perception that was seen as the unfortunate byproduct of the televisual present. But on the other hand, it also evoked an intensified preoccupation with the technological dimension of the relation between perception and environment, brought to bear on a situation where water was not just taken for a token for the televisual flow of events, but more specifically for ecological crisis and systemic breakdown. Acid rain, the object of much observation and research in the late 1960s, was just one part of this story. On the American West Coast, water had also become a critical political issue due to an imbalance between precipitation patterns and population concentrations. Paul Ryan, one of the founders of the Raindance Media Collective that published Radical Software, used video to approach a variety of critical water issues on the East Coast, notably the coast of Cape Ann, the Hudson River, and the Passaic watershed with its constant flooding problems. So flowing water had, in other words, become a figure for a vast and dangerous realm of contingencies and toxicities that called out for new levels of human engagement and action. Video was here reconfigured as an ecological operator, able to move transversely between the different registers of flow that seem to suffuse the natural, mental, and social worlds. So this ability of video to get water thus also came to define video itself as an ecological operator. In a situation of ecological crisis, the capture of a set of properties named water became a form of activity that allowed video to explore how its particular biological memory capacities could be implicated in the production of a shared environment. I wish there was time here to share with you the really expansive empirical material that emerges once you start tracing the associations between video, water, and new social models or new social ontologies. So this is just a short paper, so all I can give you are a few indications and the outline of a general principle based on the work of Paul Ryan, who is recently deceased just before Christmas, so this is also a little bit of a homage to him as well, and the work also of Frank Gillette, another Raindance founder. As a quasi-biological feedback system, video could engage other biological entities, notably TV viewers, in complex dynamic circuits. That at least was the key idea, utopian as it may sound. And this gave a whole new twist to the idea of environmental action. As video's signal-based perceptions of nature would take on the objective status of new natural entities, the affluent, urbanized humans of the first world mediascape might no longer, or so they hoped, view nature as if from a televised distance, but would be forced somehow to see themselves as part of all sorts of natural technological continuities and recursions. Now, this particular mode of video activism happened along two related axes of action and reflection. Firstly, the video of, or the video works of Ryan and Gillette all seem to approach nature through acts of monitoring and surveillance, famously identified by Stanley Cavell as the key televisual mode of perception. Yet if their cameras seem to simply register natural events, video actually produces new modes of life in their cases by engaging uncategorizable electronic forces that consistently explode the normal gauges of mediation and measure. So where, for instance, a professional biologist might choose a microscope or a video camera or a satellite to track specific types of natural objects or events, and make sure also to inscribe these objects in a coherent narrative. Video affordances here seem to intervene very explicitly to produce a techno-natural world that is explicitly multifarious and expansive, even at times monstrous. In fact, Ryan's concept of video perception which really runs through all of his work, has a lot in common with Deleuze and Guattari's notion of the percept, that is, the autonomous blocks of perception and sensation that may be produced in artworks as instances of a desire to extend beyond the already lived and simply somehow add itself to the non-human landscapes of nature. Now, in recent in recent years, such insights have led to calls for the abolition of the very concept of nature. As Timothy Morton argues, the focus on nature as such may be symptomatic of a form of ecological piety that is blind to the many agencies or instances of mediation at play in the emergent biological, technological world. And I think that such perspectives somehow echo Gillette's repeated meditations in many, many writings on the future-oriented dimension of memory technologies like video, very much against all nostalgic tendencies to fixate the past through historical representation. So the nature of ecological video, or even the nature of video as such, was neither an original condition to which one should return, restore original nature, so to speak, nor a separate entity whose need for protection could simply be proven with accurate scientific representation. Rather, both the imagination of crisis and the means to crisis management lay in constant perceptual and aesthetic involvement, a kind of non-stop innervation of the sensorial apparatus that, so to speak, enforced new types of feedback loops between modern humans and their larger biological worlds. Secondly, the political pragmatism of such video ecologies also depended on a revised concept of collective memory or social memory, or more precisely, a revised social ontology. For the implication of modern humans in technobiological feedback loops did not just turn around the quest for knowledge and understanding, but on triggering the desires at work in basic survival impulses. And the key terms here were not critique and analysis, as would be normal in most activism at the time and indeed today as well. The key terms were rather sympathy and belief. In a situation where technological, economic and ecological concerns converged in a scenario of imminent crisis, video presented itself as a subject-like monitoring system capable of taking in and sharing the specific intuitions, moods, and concerns of life systems under threat, and, so to speak, making them the connecting points of a wider social topology. So this, I'm so sorry I'm not showing entire video pieces here, and that's partly because these videos don't make much sense if you're just going to watch 2 seconds of them. So I'm just going to describe to you, this is from a work called Quiditas by Frank Gillette, and he works in this video very much in contrast to what you do in normal nature documentary. And basically, that's a question of camera movement. In normal nature documentary, you, so to speak, have a human eye. The camera is a human eye spying on nature and then closing in on detail from a certain human distance. And throughout these videos, Gillette uses a very different technique. He always starts with a small detail of nature, and then somehow makes us imagine that we're seeing the environment as this little natural entity would see it. So he immediately zooms out from the, so to speak, imagined point of view of some sort of biological entity or organism or microtopology or what have you. So it's this outward movement all the time in all of these works, which makes them, gives rather special viewing experience. Now, the concept of of sharing or imitating the point of view of natural beings was based on the dynamics of belief, which, in contrast to historical consciousness, is a type of mental formatting. A mental formatting that organizes the intuitions through which the future acts on the present. So belief here is essentially a navigational tool. And this is why Gillette speaks of a self-organizing topology of belief when he discusses the impact, the dynamics of works like these and why one should work in this way. And he associates belief with the relational logic of cybernetic models. But as importantly, belief is per definition collective in a non-contained or distributive sense of the term. It attests to the contagious dynamics of imitation and invention that, according to 19th century sociologist Gabriel Tarde, defines the social as such. So this is the basis of Gabriel Tarde's social ontology. In fact, the video-informed conception of collective life forms in Gillette's writing is closer to the basic tenets of Tarde's psychological economy than to the problematic biological discipline of memetics that Tarde's work is often said to have anticipated. And you can also sense a kind of nascent memetic thinking in Gillette. So while memetics have a very hard time explaining how ideas or so-called memes spread in ways that are analogous to genes, Gabriel Tarde simply states that what we imitate in others is not so much specific ideas as the desires and beliefs that provide navigational patterns for judgments and actions. Now, the ability of video to get water at this level of sympathy and imitation was fine, but video activism still faced a huge problem of social organization. How to make its particular topology of belief politically effective? How to get to a point where millions of individual nervous systems might be made to share and feel ecological concerns in real time? This was a problem, and the answer to this problem came in the form of Paul Ryan's Earth Score notational system and its corollary, the echo channel design for a televisual monitoring project conceived in 1985 and 86. Now, Ryan imagined teams of videographers working in a very complicated Persian tripartite logic, too much to go into here, who would constantly broadcast from a number of locations. Over time, they would pick up behavioral patterns in the individual ecosystems. More precisely, what biologist C.H. Waddington had called creodes, or necessary pathways. And the idea was that identifying such creodes might provide the basis for a perceptual syntax that might facilitate a veritable orchestration of perceptions as a result of a collective of TV viewers who would start to intuitively see and feel both regularities and critical changes in the environment. So Ryan was basically imagining that people would be connected constantly to this eco channel and constantly be monitoring nature and, so to speak, be integrating in themselves, in their perceptual systems, all the little changes in nature, so they would be able to follow changes in nature very, very quickly. And it was, I think, a project really doomed to fail. Given the ever more monolithic channeling of TV perception into the feedback loops of entertainment capital, the project obviously came across as a particularly high-minded form of utopianism. And given the guerrilla habits of much of the 1970s counterculture, attacking institutions and corporations at a macro level, feeding off antagonisms, a project built around precisely the type of aesthetic attachment to the real-time apparatus that was the driving force of capitalist media, did not have much political leverage. Today, however, Earthscore's mode of action and reflection, if not its technical or pragmatic solution, may perhaps seem less quixotic. Thinkers as different as Gerard Böhme and Bruno Latour have argued the need for increased aesthetic and perceptual sensitization to ecological issues. Facts need feelings in order to mobilize, atmospheres in which to expand, and so on. And today we know also, for better and for worse, the technologies of tracking and coordinating the most microscopic sensibilities, the likes and the dislikes, that make up vast intuitive communities. Contemporary political theory cannot fail to take into account the tangible reality of these volatile clouds of desires and beliefs and the dynamics of imitation. Yet by the same token, emphasis on the feedback loops between technical systems and life systems no longer simply present themselves as an alternative to the dominant understanding of real-time technologies and the modern mediascape. So what I've presented here today is therefore a study of a very specific and brief historical moment, the utopian moment when the living force that was seen to be video held stage as the most convincing facilitator of complex, reflexive continuities between one form of material life and another. Thank you very much for your attention.
Hello, everybody. First, I want to thank you, Guillermina Surbonas, for the fantastic effort you made to organize this symposium in many, many weeks and months with a group of people, students, colleagues, etc., and with the help of different agencies here to help to produce. I wanted to say that my contribution to the panel is from my own practice. I think artists, we needed to talk about what we're doing. And I think what I will explain is talk about several projects about public space I do through the years. I think to follow what Ina Blom contribution, I feel like my understanding of public space is also, besides the traditional public space, urban public space of the street, the squares, and now the new typologies of malls and different indoor spaces. I think television is a public space, like all the systems of communications, from the press, from the internet. And I will say that maybe that I tried to make a link on the idea of how television as a public space. Another element I want to mention is what is the question public? It's a word that we hear all the time, we question, but we are real, what is the public? I think it's a question very difficult to understand, but I think through the panels here, it will be different understandings and different ways of how this it could be understand. And connected to that, I will say that if we talk about public space, I think it's a kind of utopia these days. Public space is pretty much lost. I don't want to say a very bad, negative way, but I think we are needed to deal with the corporate world that I think occupy most of the public space. And we are in MIT, Kendall is not far. And I think other elements for public space is that also disappear because the surveillance systems, the control, makes that we are not anymore in public spaces. We are under surveillance. We are very much seeing from the systems of communication surveillance, we know that this privacy is disappear. I would like to link to two words that I think is important in relation with the idea of public space. All the projects I go to show, they are produced in different contexts. And every context it has its understanding of public space. It's not the same thing to work here than work in Sao Paulo, to work in Istanbul, or to work in India. I think it's really like this consideration of public space is also different depending on the context, and how this context is linked to identity of the place. I think it's an important connection, context and identity. From that on, I will go to talk about some of the projects made on public space. The first I want to talk is a project that I produced here in Cambridge. The first period I was in MIT. I was coming in '77. Some of the speakers they mentioned. Invited by Otto Pinev at the Center for Advanced Visual Studies. It was a great experience, sharing time with Aldo Tambellini, Alexandro Sina, and many, many other people. At that time, we worked a lot at night. I say that because it was, I think, media and dark, it was very connected. I will say this project, Media Eyes, it was a collaboration with Anne Bray. It was opening a question where we're looking at a billboard in Mass Avenue. And the project, I think, tried to raise issues of not only advertisement, but also issues of context and identity. The billboard, it was for 6 weeks, day and night, and it was, as I mentioned, trying to questioning through that different image and narrative that it was around 80 slides per the slides. A little later, in New York, also in a public context, the Times Square, I think the ultimate public space, again, changing for a corporate situation. If we see how it was in the 70s Times Square and how Times Square is now, it's a totally corporate space. Anyway, the question using the Spectacolor screen, it was, this is not an advertisement. Obviously, the paradox, what is an advertisement and not an advertisement in a context of publicity? It was a 50 seconds project insert between advertising in the Spectacolor screen for a project produced for public art in New York. The words subliminal, fragmentation, and speed, it was the key words that intersect in this 50 seconds. Moving to another context in Sao Paulo, in the end of the 90s, it was a long project. It was invited by the Artesidade, a manifestation. It happened in Sao Paulo, in different areas of Sao Paulo. This was Zona Leste, and I worked with an architect, Paula Santoro, to develop a series of metal plates that it was located in different parts of the Zona Leste, trying to questioning the discontinuity of the master plan of that area, where a series of projects, it was supposed to happen to change the area. Money was assigned for that, but it never happened. The idea of how a master plan it could change by political or economical reasons. The plates, it was installed in the places where this project was supposed, and in a way, it was a kind of, in instant, a place to commemorate. It was a place to commemorate urban disasters, because I think in this way, what he created is not only the discontinuity of the master plan, but also a lot of frustrations for the people living there, the expectations that it never happened. The 11 plates, as I mentioned, it was located each one, and commemorate with the names of the governor or the mayor that they make that decisions. A sentence that Meejin brings, warning, perception, require involvement, is a constant sentence that I have in mind, and also I share in a different project, that with different media, with different formats, and obviously different contexts. For every context, the word it needs to change, but also I think it will need to change the size, the medium itself. Sometimes it's like a relationship with projection, sometimes it's a relationship with the press, a kind of inserting in the architecture as a kind of prosthetic, orthopedical element where the question is integrated in the building. And I think a series of interventions that in a way is a companion with the different other projects in different other contexts. I think the last project in Korea, it was in certain way a kind of acupuncture on the building itself. And the last three projects I go to talk is three projects that are films for television. Films that are supposed to be public, and the moment is broadcast on television. ASIC Radio, from the series of On Translation, it was a project result for 2 years residence in Istanbul during the Istanbul capital of Europe, a kind of paradox. Istanbul, welcome as a capital of Europe. And I think it was a very interesting project that it was invited to live and work there. I don't spend the 2 years there, but I go several times, long periods, for a city that it was not so, I was not acquainted, not like Sao Paulo, that is a city I've been teaching there, I've been living there. Like that, this brings also the paradox about how the artist could go and work in a different context, and when I am very much concerned with context. Anyway, the project, after the first year of research, I decided to work with a local radio. Radio is called ASIC Radio, an alternative radio running by independents. I will say that it's a miracle this radio is existing in a city with heavy control of censorship and heavy control of the system, social systems. We see how Facebook works there, and sometimes censor, sometimes not, all the networks. Anyway, the project, it was working for and working with the radio to produce 4 broadcast radio programs, one about myth, the second about the stereotypes, the third about cultural construction of the city, and the fourth, it was about censorship. Finally, it was the film. It was produced there and made, never broadcast because the reasons of censorship, and finally, it was public through internet, and it's still there on internet. I think internet is sometimes a medium that you use directly, but sometimes as a kind of possibility to make things public. I work also in the border between Tijuana and San Diego, another context, a very dense and intense situation for crossing, but also for living. It was there, a work done 40 minutes film with, in this case, it was broadcast in Tijuana, in San Diego, Mexico City, and Washington. And the idea, it was to explore translations of feelings like fear in a very strong area, geographical area of the world, and how the translation between the north and the south is very different than the south to the north. I mean, both situations. I think the work is, it was through interviews and an incorporation of elements already being defined in the area. And the last project, Alphaville Otros, is Sao Paulo again, but connected with a subject that I think is clear connected with the idea of public space, is the idea of the gates community. In Sao Paulo, it's a series of 11 sites we call Alphaville 1, 2, till 11. I was very surprised by the name. And it's created a series of gate communities that obviously, like most of these gate communities, trying to promise living in freedom and living in green. The paradox of the project is the result is totally the contrary. I immediately associate with the film of Godard, Alphaville, and I start to see the connections that this place has with the Godard film make me to produce a 10 minutes work that use some of the Godard film, but also shootings in place and recycled material, etc., exploring the idea of this kind of place that in a way is a very surveillance and very much controlled place where it's supposed to be a private space, is private space under control of cameras, under the command of sensors, really a totally contradictory situation in terms of what people are looking for. The place Alphaville, in a way, surrounded by fences, walls, it reminds me very much old idea of forts and old cities in Europe of the Middle Age, where the cities were surrounded by murals, murallas, and walls. We could see through Google Earth, and these areas now looks very much a similar situation than it was the construction of the cities in the Middle Age. I would like to show the film that it was produced. It's a film of 10 minutes. It's a film that it was presented in a special place, installation, like reconstruction of an exhibition space for selling condominiums, like a kind of a space where, you know, real estate situation. And in this case, the film is running.
Il était 24h17, heure océanique, quand j'arrivais dans les faubourgs d'Alphaville.
Alphaville é um mundo de qualidade, de segurança, de confiança, de certezas. Alphaville é um mundo de felicidade, um mundo feito de sonhos que a gente não vê a hora de transformar em realidade. Alphaville.
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 Vous venez des pays extérieurs, Monsieur Johnson?
Oui.
C'est comment les pays extérieurs?
Vous n'y êtes jamais allé?
Non. Autrefois, quand j'étais une petite fille, mon père me racontait comment c'était. Maintenant, il est défendu d'y penser.
Vous êtes né où?
Mais ici, je vous dis, à Alphaville.
O mais surpreendente lançamento residencial de São Paulo até o momento. O reflexo do seu melhor.
Qu'est-ce qu'ils ont fait?
Ils ont été condamnés.
Il n'y a que des hommes.
En général, il y a toujours 50 hommes exécutés à mort contre une seule femme.
Mais qu'est-ce qu'ils ont fait?
Ils ont agi de façon illogique.
Dans les pays extérieurs, ce n'est pas un crime? Alphaville.
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 Alphaville é um mundo de gente que ri, que chora de rir. Gente que cai da cama.
Il arrive que la réalité soit trop complexe pour la transmission orale.
Alphaville é um mundo verde, verde esperança. Esperança de que o futuro pode e vai ser muito, mas muito melhor.
Zéro 3 des pays extérieurs. Vous menacez la sécurité d'Alphaville.
Vous avez du feu?
Oui. J'ai fait 9000 kilomètres pour vous en aller.
Les hommes ordinaires sont indignes de la position qu'ils occupent dans le monde. en analysant leur passé, on est automatiquement conduit à cette conclusion. Il faut donc les détruire, c'est-à-dire les transformer.
Qu'est-ce que vous faites? Vous pleurez?
Non. Puisque c'est défendu.
Il était 23h15, heure océanique, quand Natacha et moi sortîmes d'Alphaville par les boulevards périphériques.
Vous croyez qu'ils sont tous morts?
Non, pas encore. Ils vont peut-être guérir, d'ailleurs. Qu'Alphaville deviendra une cité heureuse comme Florence, comme Angoulême City, comme Tokiorama.
Sentiment que vous attendez que je vous dise quelque chose.
Oui. Faut y arriver toute seule, alors vous serez sauvés. Si vous n'y arrivez pas, vous êtes perdus comme les morts d'Alphaville.
I will speak in Spanish. Agradezco la invitación. Me da un gran placer estar en este coloquio relacionado con el trabajo de Antoni Muntadas.
Thanks for the invitation and to come to the symposium related to Antoni Muntadas' work.
Y voy a entrar directamente al tema con la intención de presentar una perspectiva entre antropológica y filosófica sobre el tema que nos ocupa.
I am going to go straight to the topic that occupies us, which is anthropology and philosophy.
Espero que puedan seguir bien la traducción proyectada en pantalla.
I hope you can follow the translation projected in the screen.
Lo público es nuestro abismo. Lo público es la escena de la sospecha. Se está extinguiendo por las privatizaciones y el triunfo de las fusiones de empresas globalizadas con más poder y presupuesto que los estados nacionales, o desde la perspectiva de los individuos. ¿Qué queda de la libre elección razonada de los ciudadanos y consumidores como base de una convivencia democrática cuando nuestras decisiones están inducidas por industrias audiovisuales monopólicas y espiadas en las redes que nos informan y comunican? quiero evitar dos modos habituales de enfrentar estas preguntas. La propuesta tradicionalista es cómo restaurar la ética y el orden político de una época que imaginamos más armónica o equitativa. Aunque la llamo tradicionalista, esta tendencia puede ser tanto la de nostálgicos de sociedades jerárquicas como la de quienes idealizan el momento ilustrado de la modernidad y sus utopías revolucionarias o reformistas. La segunda vía es la posmoderna, que a veces exhibe un rostro más tecnocrático, a veces neoliberal. Se supone que en la sociedad de las redes digitales y la interdependencia globalizada de todos con todos, quedó rebasada la noción moderna de lo público, centrada en las relaciones cara a cara y en la gestión democrática de naciones autocontenidas. En su versión cínica, la aceptación resignada de la descomposición de lo público moderno se convierte en celebración de la velocidad y lo inestable, justificación de la injusticia y las destrucciones necesarias, indiferencia a la precariedad y el dolor social. No son viables estas regresiones. El carácter irreversible de muchas transformaciones tecnológicas, de las tendencias individualistas y la interdependencia global, no permite retraerse a modos comunitarios y homogéneos de organización social. Tampoco regresar a órdenes jerárquicos que, sin embargo, seducen aún a multitudes, como se ve en la renovada influencia de las religiones y el crecimiento de partidos y movimientos xenofóbicos. Ambas tendencias regresivas, pese a sus distancias, coinciden al idealizar etapas históricas que no fueron tan felices como se las evoca. Quienes celebran el modelo de lo público en la Grecia clásica, por ejemplo, deben hacerse cargo de cómo se limitaba a los ciudadanos adultos y excluía a los esclavos y los extranjeros. Si recurrimos al liberalismo ilustrado y su idea de la democracia basada en el voto llamado universal, surge una pregunta irónica. ¿Universal? En cuanto advertimos que ese adjetivo se usaba antes de mediados del siglo XX, cuando las mujeres todavía no votaban. Propongo que pensemos la desintegración actual de lo público como consecuencia de la pérdida de los referentes que ordenaban la vida en común: Dios, la familia, la nación y las grandes ciudades. La descomposición de lo público ocurre por el convergente derrumbe de los dogmas religiosos y de las épicas nacionales, por la fragmentación y la inseguridad en las ciudades, la desestabilización de los comportamientos que generan las innovaciones tecnológicas, la radicalización de la desigualdad y otros cambios que modifican las maneras de comunicarnos. La expansión sinérgica de estas transformaciones conduce a atrincherarse en el individualismo y en fantasías de refugio microgrupales o en retornos impracticables. Después de que Dostoyevski dijo: si Dios no existe, todo está permitido, hemos tenido que aprender a vivir en mayor soledad, sin reglas prescritas, nuestras decisiones y la confrontación con las menos previsibles decisiones de los otros. Sabemos que gran parte del pensamiento contemporáneo, desde el existencialismo hasta el posmodernismo, es una meditación sobre esta pérdida de certezas. En los años 60 y 70, la antigua preocupación por la crisis de la familia se acentuó hasta hablar de su muerte. Con esta fórmula suelen abarcarse hechos tan diversos como el acceso de las mujeres a un papel más pleno en la vida pública, el aumento de divorcios y la noticia de que en muchas sociedades occidentales aproximadamente la mitad de las casas están habitadas por personas solas. En Estados Unidos, los hogares completos de dos padres con hijos, que eran el 43% en 1960, bajaron a 23.5% en el año 2000. En América Latina nos aproximamos a esos porcentajes de familias con madres pero sin padre, o al revés, o parejas sin hijos. También hijos sin padres, niños de la calle, huérfanos de guerras, separaciones por exilio y migraciones. Si se pierde el papel contenedor de la familia clásica, su capacidad de producir sujetos y asignarles roles precisos como padres, madres e hijos, queda la sensación de que todo está permitido. Sectores conservadores reaccionan con nostalgia de la familia tradicional, pero incluso quienes valoramos formas de vida familiar más flexibles, padres separados pueden dar mejor contención que una estructura unida autoritaria, experimentamos la inseguridad actual. En las últimas décadas, a medida que la globalización económica, tecnológica y comunicacional reduce el papel de los estados, las empresas transnacionales actúan como si la nación estuviera dejando de existir y se les permitiera todo. La mayoría de los gobiernos nacionales opera como si ahora no importara que haya bancos nacionales, ni industria nacional, ni leyes nacionales que regulen todos esos campos en beneficio de cada sociedad. También las grandes ciudades padecen el vértigo de la desintegración. La capital mexicana, que saltó de 1.644.000 habitantes que la poblaban en 1940 a los 22 millones actuales, se desbordó en una post-ciudad, según la fórmula de algunos urbanistas. En sus ensayos sobre el caos urbano, Carlos Monsiváis hablaba de una ciudad post-apocalíptica porque lo peor ya pasó. La desordenada congestión urbana, la fragmentación y desarticulación de los vínculos comunitarios, como en otras megalópolis, parece eliminar el sentido de vivir juntos. Si no hay ciudad, todo está permitido. Contaminar, asaltar, extorsionar, apropiarse del espacio compartido con fines de lucro. Propongo a partir de estos rápidos trazos una definición. Lo público es el lugar imaginario donde quisiéramos conjurar o controlar el riesgo de que todo esté permitido. Nos preocupamos por lo público porque necesitamos organizar este sitio donde Dios está ausente, donde lo que queda de la familia y el Estado-nación no son suficientes para establecer reglas de convivencia. Si decimos que lo público es un lugar imaginario, surge la pregunta de si el arte y la literatura serían propicios para rescatarlo y renovarlo. El problema de relacionar lo público con el arte es que éste no tiene como propósito controlar el riesgo. Sabemos que las artes contemporáneas, no solo las artes plásticas y la literatura, también la música, el performance, el cine y el video, se han mostrado en cambio propensas a cultivar el riesgo y a experimentar con lo que no está permitido. Sin embargo, la innovación que experimentan con lo no permitido aparece en muchos artistas junto al deseo de actuar en espacios públicos, problematizar los vínculos entre lo público y lo privado. Nuestro homenajeado de hoy, Antoni Muntadas, está acompañado por muchos otros en esta tarea de reinventar el trabajo artístico para reimaginar lo público. El arte participa activamente en la reformulación de las preguntas sobre el sentido de la convivencia social. Y el primer movimiento para hacerlo es reformulando los modos de definirse a sí mismo. Hemos dejado la pregunta sustancialista ¿qué es el arte? Y nos interrogamos ¿cuándo hay arte? Así como las proclamadas muertes de Dios, de la familia, de la nación y de las ciudades no han logrado que se deje de hablar de ellos, los discursos fúnebres sobre el arte no impiden que se multipliquen las bienales y ferias artísticas, que las obras incrementen su precio y sirvan como laboratorios de experimentación intelectual para la filosofía, la antropología, el psicoanálisis y el diseño. Lo que ha ocurrido en este laboratorio es que la pregunta abandonó la metafísica y se ha corrido al conjunto de relaciones sociales, instituciones, curadores, críticos, públicos y aún empresas y dispositivos publicitarios que construyen el reconocimiento de ciertos objetos como artísticos. Desde la redefinición del artista como productor, Benjamin y los constructivistas, se trabaja considerando no solo las obras, sino el proceso de producción, circulación y consumo. Desde entonces hasta las recientes estéticas relacional y situacionista, hemos pasado de las prácticas artísticas basadas en objetos a prácticas situadas en contextos, en medios de comunicación y redes sociales, en formas de participación social donde parece diluirse la diferencia estética. Antes de regresar al debate sobre lo público, es necesario preguntarnos si en este giro intermedial, relacional y transdisciplinario de las prácticas artísticas, lo estético retiene alguna diferencia. ¿Queda algo distintivo de las prácticas artísticas en su época post-autónoma? Resumo aquí la respuesta que he creído encontrar en algunos escritores y en artistas como Sildo Meireles y Antoni Muntadas, que desarrollo en mi libro Art Beyond Itself, que aparecerá en mayo de 2014 en Duke University Press. La clave para diferenciar el acontecimiento estético me la dio un párrafo de Borges. Dice Borges, la música, los estados de felicidad, la mitología, las caras trabajadas por el tiempo, ciertos crepúsculos y ciertos lugares quieren decirnos algo, o algo dijeron que no hubiéramos debido perder, o están por decir algo. Esta inminencia de una revelación que no se produce es quizá el hecho estético. Ser escritor o artista, por tanto, no sería aprender un oficio codificado, cumplir con requisitos fijados por un canon y así pertenecer a un campo donde se logran efectos que se justifican por sí mismos. Tampoco pactar desde ese campo con otras prácticas políticas, publicitarias, institucionales, que darían repercusión a los juegos estéticos. La literatura y el arte dan resonancia a voces que proceden de lugares diversos de la sociedad y las escuchan de modos diferentes a otros. Hacen con ellas algo distinto que los discursos políticos, sociológicos o religiosos. Quizá la especificidad del arte reside en este modo de decir que no llega a pronunciarse plenamente, en esta inminencia de una revelación. Encuentro un antecedente de esta postura en la frase escrita por Walter Benjamin 15 años antes que Borges, en 1935, al definir el aura del arte como la manifestación irrepetible de una lejanía. ¿En qué sentido podría ser productiva esta redefinición del hecho estético como inminencia, contingencia, manifestación de una lejanía, para repensar la agonía actual de lo público? Nos aleja, en primer lugar, de ciertas concepciones pragmáticas, utilitaristas, sobre cómo hace sociedad el arte. Desde los años 60 y 70 advertimos el bajo efecto social de las acciones artísticas al servicio de militancias que critican las injusticias y revalorizan la vida pública. ¿Por qué tienen tan poco impacto happenings o performances transgresores o la exposición de fotos de víctimas de una dictadura o una discriminación étnica o de género? Obras tan potentes como el Guernica de Picasso nos conmueven, pero no provocan la movilización de los espectadores. Jacques Rancière sostiene que el arte logra una eficacia paradojal. No logra la emancipación del espectador potenciando con recursos formales la indignación, sino mediante una operación que altera el conjunto de los vínculos habituales entre el Estado y la comunidad, los modos ordinarios de representarlo y los hábitos perceptivos de los ciudadanos. En esta posición de Rancière se concibe a la política no como simple disputa por el poder, sino como la actividad que reconfigura los cuadros sensibles en el seno de los cuales se definen los objetos comunes. Cuando las innovaciones estéticas alteran el orden sensible que naturaliza una estructura social, hacen política porque modifican una instancia de enunciación colectiva que rediseña el espacio de las cosas comunes. La experiencia estética como experiencia de disenso se opone a la adaptación mimética o ética del arte con fines sociales. Las producciones artísticas hacen posible, fuera de la red de conexiones que fijaban un sentido preestablecido, que los espectadores vuelquen su percepción, su cuerpo y sus pasiones a algo distinto que la dominación. Voy a poner dos ejemplos. ¿Cómo desfetichizar el papel de dinero en el capitalismo? No se trata de mudar el arte a la política o a la economía. Lejos de las facilidades de quienes ponen música o imágenes a un manifiesto político, Sildo Meireles y Muntadas buscan desarmar en el lenguaje y en la comunicación visual los enlaces discursivos y prácticos entre actores y los dispositivos que intervienen en los movimientos del dinero. Así, las inserciones en circuitos ideológicos de Meireles, como la impresión del 0 cruzeiro o el $0, buscan colocarse en el punto cero, el instante o la situación previa a la existencia, en el lugar de inminencia del mercado. A diferencia de cualquier retórica política, Meireles abre una conciencia política de nuevo cuño, escribe Mareta Yaucuri, nos deja ante la zona limítrofe de un peligro inminente. Implica un método de sublimación que no pertenezca al paradigma trágico-heroico de la militancia política. Meireles se muestra más satisfecho con el $0 porque el 0 cruzeiro arriesgaba a confundir su obra con una discusión sobre la crónica inflación brasileña, limitaba su significado al localizarlo en su país. En realidad, dice Meireles, lo que me interesaba comentar era el abismo que hay entre el valor simbólico y el valor real, el valor de uso y el valor de cambio, cosa que en el arte es una operación continua, permanente. El objetivo consistía en que la gente toma el billete de banco y se pregunta ¿qué es un cruzeiro? ¿Qué lenguaje es este? El otro ejemplo es un translation, The Bank, de Muntadas. En una hoja donde se producen los paneles que anuncian las cotizaciones de divisa, Muntadas sobreimprimió un billete de $1000 y debajo puso la silueta de un reloj de arena, apenas visible porque se le encima en letras gruesas la gran pregunta que leemos. La mayoría de los nombres de países y de las monedas no se leen al estar ocultas por 22 banderas de varios continentes. La fría enumeración en blanco y negro de las cotizaciones queda eufemizada por el símbolo en colores de cada país. Este trabajo, destinado a participar en la exposición colectiva The Bank Inside the Counting House, efectuada en una antigua sede abandonada del Chase Manhattan Bank, al preguntar cuánto tardarían en desaparecer $1000 mediante operaciones de cambio, contrasta con la elocuencia cromática firme de las banderas nacionales. Las transacciones monetarias, como traducción inestable, lo que se pierde al pasar de una moneda a otra como equivalente a las devaluaciones de las operaciones simbólicas entre países. Se reubica en estos trabajos el proceso artístico en el lugar de la inminencia, en este caso en la inminencia del mercado, en el origen de las incertidumbres que ni la economía ni la política logran regular. Nos pone ante el abismo originario no solo del intercambio mercantil, sino de lo que nos hace convivir en lo público. El arte no nos protege del abismo con un repertorio de respuestas que vendrían a reemplazar el dogma religioso o la unificación comunitaria bajo una fe patriótica. El hecho artístico, en cambio, es el acontecimiento inestable donde las preguntas y las dudas se traducen y traducen. On Translation es un proyecto que se replica en muchos países y lenguas, nunca el mismo. ¿Qué predica finalmente? ¿Que solo nos queda la capacidad de derivar, seguir deambulando entre versiones? También nosotros nos vamos disolviendo en esas operaciones como los $1000 al ir cambiando de una moneda a otra. No encuentro en estos trabajos estético-conceptuales la exaltación individualista ni la disolución del yo celebrada por cierta posmodernidad. Muntadas nombra sujetos difusos, transnacionales, difíciles de aprender, pero sujetos al fin. El banco es el sujeto que traduce los dineros, y sus traducciones no desembocan en la ruina generalizada. Algunos se enriquecen. La identificación de los actores, como ocurre en los mapas de la mesa de negociación y en otras obras de Muntadas, permite entrever un sentido en el vértigo del abismo financiero, pero tampoco postula una geopolítica alternativa, un relato que recomponga para todos el orden del mundo. La decisión de Muntadas de adecuar sus obras a los contextos de la ciudad o de la nación en que actúa, y a veces del arte o los discursos mediáticos de esos lugares, restituye en la vorágine circulatoria un sentido público. El artista duda de lo que conviene decir en cada lugar y busca interactuar con la lengua, los códigos, los conflictos y las preguntas de ese drama local. La traducción no se pierde en el vacío si todos, artistas, instituciones y receptores, somos interpelados. Quiero terminar observando que esta discusión sobre la ineficacia política del arte tiene semejanzas con la ineficacia de los movimientos políticos. Las formas más institucionalizadas de gestión, como los gobiernos y los partidos, están mundialmente afectados por las evidencias de la extendida corrupción y por su incapacidad para regular la voracidad económica y financiera. A la vez, la expansión nacional e internacional de movimientos sociales, étnicos, ecologistas, feministas y estudiantiles, expresión del enorme descontento provocado por partidos y gobiernos, muestran un desempeño tan efímero como el de las artes. Movimientos como Occupy Wall Street, el 15M español o el 132 mexicano son capaces de denunciar la inconsistencia de las políticas gubernamentales y la corrupción, al usar las redes sociales y acciones performáticas urbanas en las que develan la manipulación de los medios, logran movilizar a sectores que descreían de que se pudiera recrear la esfera pública. Llegan a asociar solidariamente a sectores que estaban dispersos, pero no hay un pasaje automático, por decirlo rápido, de Wikileaks al ejercicio de nuevas ciudadanías, y menos a cambios de las estructuras de mediano y largo plazo. Vivimos un tiempo de ciudadanías de alta intensidad y corta duración. a la incertidumbre generada por el desvanecimiento de estructuras organizadoras de la convivencia social, como la nación, la familia y la ciudad, se añade la reorganización de la escena comunicacional. Luego de unos años en que las redes sociales e Internet sorprendieron con su potencial para fortalecer las interacciones públicas, llegamos a la era del espionaje en las redes, que resulta ser más controlador que el de los medios masivos. No veo por qué le vamos a pedir al arte que llene el vacío dejado por la destrucción política y económica de lo público, ni que tenga la eficacia y la durabilidad que los movimientos sociales no logran. Quizá la tarea artística sea recordarnos que podemos reiniciar, desfatalizar las estructuras del mercado, del lenguaje, de los hábitos, valorizar la inminencia. La función del arte no es proveer un modelo alternativo para la vida pública, ni energías simbólicas para fortalecer alguna política que pretendería ofrecer ese modelo. Se trata más bien de colocarse en los puntos de intersección entre lo visible, lo compartible y lo practicable. Contra los consensos impuestos, incita a reimaginar un sentido común polémico. Thank you very much.
I'm going to raise just a couple of issues because so many are available to us now from these very rich presentations and Muntadas' work as an artist and as a theorist of art. I want to start with the idea of translation. Translation literally means bringing from one place to another. And so it has the root of space, of moving through space. And it's very much at the heart of Muntadas' work. Also, I think at the heart of García Canclini's work when he talks about the hybrid, because the hybrid is nothing solid. It's transactional. It's the toggling between codes. So movement, dynamism is one of the themes here, and Ina's work, I think, set us up for it because thinking about the video as that transitional medium between the ephemeral and the realizable, that invitation to be a participant observer in the world, I think links up with this theme. But I want to raise the question of what public means. And in Spanish, it's easy to distinguish between lo público, what is public, and the public, meaning people. And as somebody who's trained in literature more than other arts, I know that some critics believe, and I like to believe them, that art creates its public. Art makes a public. Art doesn't identify so much as convene. And some of you who know me know that one of my favorite artists is the ex-mayor of Bogotá, Colombia, Antoni Muntadas, who finally decided he could call himself an artist after several of us insisted for years. But what he did in an impossibly chaotic and violent and corrupt city was to just break habits by firing the corrupt traffic cops in the middle of the city of Bogotá and hiring 20 pantomime artists to direct traffic. They had no power to do anything, couldn't give a ticket, couldn't put anybody in jail. They just made people laugh at transgressors and noticed that a traffic light was a prop for fun, that a crosswalk was another prop, and that we were all, as Augusto Boal would call us, spect actors. Nobody was free. We were all part of a public. And he convened a public through participatory art in a way that I feel convened by Muntadas' work. And Alphaville, I mean, so many issues come up with this 10-minute film. First of all, I was struck by the two frames, right? So immediately this question of bi-vision, bi-locality, translation organized the thing for me, and also in time because of this kind of noir sci-fi trigger of the work. But there was I thought a utopianism and an optimism there, because by being involved in the tragedy of Alphaville, through this beautiful young woman protagonist who brought herself to cry and then to say the words that would free her, I thought that there was an agenda there and not just a denunciation. So those are, okay, two themes, translation, convening a public through art, and I also want to mention just one more theme, and I'll sit down, and that is that when Néstor talks about art as immanence and goes back to Borges and then further back to Benjamin, I think we can go further back to Immanuel Kant. Kant says that to be enlightened is to think freely in public. You have to say something that you're thinking about without constraints for everyone to hear. Because if you try to think freely by yourself, you're still stuck in your head. You have to be available for the transactional, for the translational, for the dissensus. Okay? He says, but how do you begin to think freely when you are the subject of institutions that have burdened you and trapped you, when you're a subject of a crown, a church, and traditional morality and greed? How do you do it? He couldn't figure it out with the first big critique on pure reason, which was about nature, whether that's out of date or not to talk about nature as such. And he wrote another critique about society, right? The critique of practical reason, about our sociality, desire, morality. Because we live in the world, we're not impartial viewers. But he wasn't done, because neither of those types of reason can lead us to freedom. We're stuck in tracks of reason that have established answers, and our goal is to get to those answers, to know, to discover. That doesn't allow us to be free. The only way to be free is to be excited, to be buzzed about something that doesn't have an established value or answer. And what is that? What can we get excited about that doesn't make us rich or moral or famous? It's art. It's art. It's only the aesthetic experience that makes us excited enough and confused enough, because there's no answer pre-prepared, that forces us to exercise judgment, to talk to one another in horizontal ways and not look for a vertical answer. It's only the aesthetic moment. And it's because art confuses us, surprises us, and confuses us, and gives us that buzz with no answers. And it's preconceptual. He's very clear to say it's not only disinterested, it's preconceptual, that we need to talk to each other. In other words, we need to make a public in a kind of intersubjective way, and maybe develop a name for that which we are talking about. That's how art generates new concepts, generates new ways to talk about nature, to talk about sociality, to talk about information. I'm done here. So what I want to say is that the relationship between art, the aesthetic experience, which for Kant was just receptive. His disciples like Schiller were more activist about art. But the aesthetic experience and the responsibility to keep making art, which is Schiller's addition to this discussion, is what can still promise us some public or the public lateral connections that I feel from all three of these papers, and that I'm very grateful for, because as critical and as we are of this loss that we're acknowledging, the very fact that we're convened around the combination between art and public space is a responsibility to be optimistic. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to be really fast, but echoing the feeling of translation, I'm going to start in Spanish. And I don't want a translation for this, but I'll cycle back to it. Muchos años después, frente al pelotón de fusilamiento, el coronel Aureliano Buendía había de recordar aquella tarde remota en que su padre lo llevó a conocer el hielo. So I start with just Gabriel García Márquez's canonical, beautiful sentence that starts 100 Years of Solitude. Because I think it was a sentence that a lot of us instantly returned to upon hearing yesterday's news. It's a bit of a shared collective memory. There's something so illusory and intellectually something I find very hard to argue. Yet it speaks to the way in which artistic creation can read and map reality, and when it gets it right, like with this sentence or like the works we're discussing today, then it sticks, it strikes a powerful chord. So memory, or belief. And I also read the sentence because it speaks of another elusive topic that both our speakers, all of our speakers have alluded to today, which is a sense of time, a push and pull of an illusory future, and a remote past that are all simultaneously present. So the sentence is quite beautiful, right? Many years later, in the future, about to die at the end, Aureliano Buendía would remember the past, childhood. But this is all happening right now, so all these times are simultaneously with us, collapsed. So I found it really nice in all these papers that we have an intersection of two discourses, and I see sort of Muntadas' work in the middle of that. While Néstor carefully reflected on the implications of work like Muntadas in terms of its possibilities for dissent. And here we have a whole conversation on dissensus, revealing actors and unraveling networks of operation, the artistic operation altering a naturalized order and thus becoming political in that way. Thinking together with Jacques Rancière. So Néstor reflected on this revealing and rendering visible. Ina's wonderful paper meditated on the capabilities of video as a monitoring system that might share specific intuitions, moods, and concerns of life systems and connect them to the social. So a feedback loop between technical systems and life systems, here citing the work of SES theorists such as Gabriel Tarde and Bruno Latour. So somewhere between the tactics of the census and the feedback loop of video and its ability to trace or map the social, we find artistic work that can operate either through these categories to reveal political, environmental, or cultural processes that inform our realities. Then both in all these presentations, either the artistic agency towards the census, the potentialities of video itself, that have the ability or desire to map and reveal the complexities of the social. Might we say this mapping can be the way the artist can construct an immanent, ephemeral public sphere, a way in which a work can construct a space, and here I speak as an architect, a shared common ground in which we can access this revealed reality. So I'd like to propose shared questions to the panel in terms of this public sphere that is revealed, mapped, unraveled through artistic work. What is here the role of the public or audience in the construction of this space? In other words, those who read. And public and audience, I mean, I'm addressing the issue of different contexts also that Muntadas brought up. Ina spoke beautifully of the idea of a shared belief as a dynamic of imitations and inventions, and Néstor spoke of art as the imminence of a revelation, Benjamin's phenomenon of remoteness that we can understand collectively. And here I also think of Kant's sensus communis, right? So here it's Muntadas' work that tells us as an audience that attention requires participation. So I would be interested in hearing more about this feedback loop of how audiences, sites, and reception in turn inform the artistic action. And if art creates society, I'd like to know how society in turn creates art. Thank you. And I think now we'll go into the table. So can you, perhaps we can start with Muntadas, speaking about the public, the reception of your work by the construction of your work through different publics.
Well, I was thinking that I was finished with the presentation. I mean, I was ready for questions and to try to make a more interactive situation, no? Than extended another presentation.
Thank you. Both the respondents sort of alluded to this question that has been bothering me from the very beginning when I looked at the program. And the title of the program is Public Space, and my question is, where's the public? What we have in this room and next door are practitioners and academics. What I don't see are representations, representatives, if you will, of what Ana Maria León, I think, talked about, and also what Doris Sommer talked about. And I have to congratulate the two of you. These were the most pointed remarks, for me at least, that I've heard all afternoon. But I really would like to find out how this was organized so that the public, however you want to define the public, and that maybe is a session all by itself, is not here.
My questions are for Antoni and for Néstor. Néstor, I'd love to get your paper so I could read it. It'd be awesome. And Antoni, I would love to hear what your current thoughts are about the accepted, and what, and then where do you feel sort of everyday life is in terms of what we as a sociality are accepting now. I'd love to hear your thoughts on your musings on the accepted.
You question about the meaning of acceptance?
No, what you feel is currently accepted. In your introduction, they talked about, you think a lot about what we as a society accepts. I'm wondering what your thoughts are about what we're accepting right now.
Well, I don't know if I got to answer your question, but I think what I mentioned is like a normal definition of public space is traditionally the sense of what is the urban space, no? And I was extended to the communication systems in terms of to enlarge the view of the public. I think what happened in the press, what happened in television, what happened in internet these days, I think is already the public. I think all the social networks, I think that in a way supposed to be a network of private communication, it becomes the real public space. We see, and also public space and effective in certain way. We see issues of WikiLeaks, we see a lot of the disclassification of information that is not accessible and how it's become visible. I think this idea that comes from the Agora and the Foro, the Roman Greek spaces of discussion, are important because it's interesting what we see with the old Occupy movements is happening in the squares, it happened in the agoras. In a way, this exists and is effective, but the other parts of the networks is also another kind of effectivity. It's the effectivity of the one by one, and I think it's important.
Hi, thank you for those presentations. I wanted to ask all of you a question that figured in Professor Sommer's remarks. As I'm sure a lot of people in this room have experienced, the internship in our field is something that's usually free and unpaid. When we talk about the public domain and content that's in the public domain, it's content that has no money value, which is why it's available for free. And in the case of something like Alphaville, you have a gated community which is protected in many ways from the critique of this film. The film is available for free, but how do we know that its impact will be appreciated by the people who live inside these gated communities? So I wanted to ask you about what is the role of value, of monetary value and different kinds of values which would be able to assert themselves in the context of the public space in a way that their effect will reverberate in society in a way that would be appreciated by people who have power in the forms of money, authority, right to violence, and things like that.
Néstor, this is for you.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Is there any way to make the free more valuable in the context of public space as a free space?
¿Alguna forma de hacer lo gratis más de mayor valor dentro del espacio público como algo gratis?
Yo podría contestar con una pregunta a Muntadas.
I could answer with a question for Muntadas.
Que estaba pensando cuando se hacían las intervenciones anteriores.
I was thinking during the other people presentations.
Pero antes de hacerle la pregunta a Antoni,
Before doing the question to Antoni.
Es evidente que hay una diversidad de experiencias de lo público.
It's obvious there is a diversity of public experience.
En el mundo musulmán,
In the Muslim world,
aún dentro de Occidente, en países muy distintos.
sorry, even in different countries within Western civilization.
El sentido de lo público en Francia
The sense of public in France
es muy distinto incluso que en otros países europeos como Italia.
it's very different than in other countries, European countries like Italy.
Recuerdo una respuesta que dio John Berger cuando le preguntaron por qué había dejado Inglaterra y por qué había elegido Francia para vivir.
I remember the answer of John Berger when he was asked why he had left England and went to France to live.
Y Berger dijo, me encanta Italia y fue el primer país en el que pensé para ir a vivir.
I love Italy and it's the first place I thought to go to live.
Pero los italianos no tienen la experiencia del silencio.
But the Italians don't have the experience of silence.
Y eso es un punto importante en lo público.
And that is a strong point in the public.
Yo creo que una manera de leer la experiencia de lo público y sus diferencias
A way to read the experience of the public realm and its differences.
Es cómo se trabaja con el vacío.
How do you work with the emptiness?
Cómo se elabora lo que no puede ser controlado.
How do you elaborate on those things that you cannot control?
Cómo se vive el silencio.
How do you live in silence?
Mi experiencia como latinoamericano, Argenmex,
My experience as Latin American, Argentinian and Mexican
es que en Estados Unidos hay una experiencia de lo público muy distinta.
is that in the United States there's a very different experience on public space.
Por ejemplo, en las dificultades de traducción de las que muy bien hablaba Doris como un problema central en todo este debate,
And the difficulty of translations as a central problem of this debate.
en algunas sociedades se resuelve segregando los barrios de las comunidades étnicas.
In some cities, it is solved by dividing the different neighborhoods by ethnical.
Y en otros lugares, como la mayoría de las ciudades latinoamericanas, pero también Nueva York,
And in other cities, like most Latin American cities, but also New York,
hay que hacerse cargo de los conflictos de la convivencia.
someone has to take charge of the conflict of getting together.
Y los ruidos que esto produce.
And the sounds, noise that this produces.
Y la dificultad de encontrar modos de saltar, de trascender los silencios que nos dividen.
And the difficulty of transcending the silence that divides us.
A mí me gustaría, si Antoni nos puede contar algunas experiencias de qué significó trabajar con el sentido de lo público o del miedo en las dos situaciones en que trabajó los videos sobre el miedo, en la frontera de España con África y en la de Tijuana-San Diego, y el sentido de lo público, por ejemplo, comparando Estambul con Sao Paulo.
So he's asking for Muntadas to talk about his experience working in the edge in Africa and Spain and Mexico and USA in terms of fear and public space.
Bueno, iba a hablar español. I think the two projects on translation, Fear Miedo in Tijuana, San Diego, and I start first. And working there, I realized that a situation similar is between the south of Spain and North Africa. That it was two consecutive projects that dealing with the same issues of border, but borders located in a totally different geographical situations. I think the border is a is a perfect example of translation. I think the experience of working in Tijuana and San Diego, and actually I think the public is somebody like Teddy Cruz, then I think I have conversations when I was there, and I think I interviewed you. It was an experience of seeing the North has a different fear of the South than the South it has of the North. The North, it has the fear of the unknown, the fear of not understand another language, the fear to see a population of people that need it, but in another way they have a certain kind of méfiance. The South is another kind of physical fear. Is the fear of looking for employment, looking for another quality of life, and is the fear also to a certain kind of confronting the power of the North. Working there, I decided I wanted to work in where I come from a project related to Spain and North Africa. And the experience, it was very interesting because in the first one, a final project, it was 30 minutes, interviews, material from films, material from different sources, working in Tanger and Tarifa, come up much more longer film. I think the complexity of the two borders are similar, but the North Africa and South Europe adding religion to the situation. Like that, what in United States and Mexico, the cultural difference are based on certain kind, obviously economical, cultural, and political situations. In the border between Africa and Europe, it was also to adding the religion as a complex situation, very complex, then also in the way how we understand Arab countries, immediately we associate issues with the last stereotypes of terrorism and issues of associated the politics with religions or the Islam to a situation that totally we will undo with other religions. I don't think the Catholicism it could be related to politics, or maybe in the past, but not in the way that now is related the politics of in the Arab countries of religion. I think all that made that in every project I start for curiosity to learn something. And to learn something and spending time doing a project is the experience, I think, of the project. And it's what you get and trying to expand or to transmit or to refer to an audience. I think it was an interesting beginning of a question about the public in terms of what we call public in relationship what also could be called audience. Is like there are terms that are very loud, but I think they're full of connotations, but also is a series of, I think, manipulations that we considering, and we could see that clearly when we go to move to politics, or we move to advertising, or we move to another kind of computation of values of statistics of votes or rates, where all that becomes like the public is taking in consideration just because the need of to use the public. Like that, I don't know, I think here we are talking very much about the public space, or we will talk more and more, considering the panels that are coming. But I think it's interesting to see the public from the perspective of the audience too, not only the public of the use of the space.
I'm just curious if anyone has found anything on how cultural identity is changing as a result of the internet, and if anybody has really got into that issue and studied that. So there's like more of a common identity now, it seems, because of the internet. People are connecting, you know, from all over the world online. That's become a new public space.
Well, I don't know about identity. I mean, obviously, the idea, I mean, the old idea of crowds, mass versus audiences, I mean, are reconfigured with the internet, and maybe we are back to more of a situation of the unruly crowd with all sorts of volatile associations and disassociations, etc. Less an idea of the audience, which is more controllable, and always a sense of the what can you get out of the audience, or the mass, which is very much the old mass medium conception of the public. But I think this is an incredibly complex issue because of all the new modes of control, precisely based on these dynamics. And this was a little bit what I was talking about. My talk was a little bit nostalgic in the sense that I was talking about the moment when you thought that this differentiating, so to speak, life-producing dynamics that you could have with signalétic technologies, that they would produce somehow a new, more aware, more politically dynamic social sphere that would among other things, for instance, make ecological action efficient. And we've all seen this hasn't happened at all. I mean, consensus and action is incredibly hard to achieve. And what we've also seen is precisely those types of intense, very rapid feedback loops that we now live with technology, which you know really see in action. I mean, the artists I'm talking about, of course, weren't able to. They could just, you know, model these things very, very crudely. But now we have these things. But we know there's, I mean, nothing that's being such an object of, you know, capitalization these days as these dynamics. So, I mean, just I don't have to tell you about, you know, all these mechanisms, but algorithms are written every day to exploit that. So what type of identities we get out of that, I have absolutely no idea. If anybody could tell us about that, I'd be very happy. But I've avoided the identity question.
May I ask a question? I want to ask a question that I've been holding in abeyance, but it comes out anyway. And that is, following on the theme, one of the themes that Ina presented and that Muntadas and Néstor also had to develop, is the question of the sympathy, the desires that get produced around these new art technologies, and what happens with them. Where is the follow-through? Néstor talked about the Occupy movements in different versions. We could talk about Arab Spring. Of course, that's a different case because there might have been a follow-through plan. But are artists thinking together with people in business, in government, in development, in non-combative ways, or desensual ways that are not unproductive. In other words, are we harnessing some of the energy that's being produced through good art today in programmatic ways?
Me parece que cuando nos desplazamos efectivamente de la época en que pensábamos lo público en relación con la ciudad y con los medios, a este momento en que también tenemos que pensarlo en relación con las redes de Internet, cambia las preguntas.
So I think when we move from thinking of the time when the media and public space before as they were traditionally, and we move to the time of internet and this other type of communication, the question changes.
Mi impresión personal, en un sentido más general, que obviamente ahora no podemos desarrollar, es que estamos en una etapa del pensamiento y de las ciencias sociales y del arte en que las preguntas son más importantes que las respuestas.
In my personal opinion, that I cannot elaborate more now, is that we are in a time more of questions than of answers.
Concretamente sobre la...
You don't think it's always been like that? ¿No crees que siempre ha sido así?
No, porque en los años 60 o 70, por ejemplo, había relatos que eran asumidos por gran parte de la humanidad como respuestas o narrativas suficientes.
So, no, because in the 60s and 70s there were narratives that were assumed by society as general narratives or knowledge.
Aún en el mundo de la filosofía, que es el lugar donde las preguntas son más radicales, había doctrinas, había tendencias hegemónicas.
Even in the world of philosophy, which usually follows more dogmas, there were tendencies that were more theoretical and sorry, what was the other word?
Doctrinas.
And how do you say it?
Tendencias hegemónicas.
Doctrines and hegemonic.
Pero concretamente lo quiero responder en relación con la cuestión de las tecnologías comunicacionales en red y cómo se ha transformado el problema de la propiedad intelectual, de lo que tenemos en común.
So I want to answer the question in terms of internet and systems and how we answer the question of copyright.
Bueno, ya traducir copyright es tomar una posición, porque en realidad hay 4 modos de propiedad intelectual que están existiendo en el mundo.
My translation was wrong. Saying copyright already means adopting a position. There's really 4 types of different intellectual property.
Copyright es en la contemporaneidad la propiedad intelectual ejercida por las empresas, por las corporaciones. ¿Quién traduce?
Copyright is intellectual property as interpreted by corporations.
En oposición a los derechos de autor, a la propiedad individual del narrador que escribe una novela y que todavía se piensa que tiene en el sentido francés o europeo, una propiedad intelectual individualizada.
In opposition to the author's rights of somebody, for example, who writes a novel in the French sense and has hence the rights of his own work.
Pero hay una tercera, y necesitamos por lo tanto otra palabra, que es derechos de autor.
So we need one more, a different term than author's rights. Yes.
No copyright, sino derechos de autor.
Not copyright, author's rights.
Pero hay un tercer sentido que todavía en muchas sociedades latinoamericanas, africanas y asiáticas es importante, y que es la propiedad comunitaria de la producción.
So there's a third sense that's still very important in Latin American, African, different type other societies, which is community property, community sense of property.
Se siguen haciendo muchas músicas, muchas artesanías en las que no conocemos el nombre de una persona como autor, sino de una comunidad.
There's still a musical production that's being made, crafts, where we don't know the name of one author, but they're the product of a community.
Y tenemos una cuarta forma que es la propiedad intelectual comunitaria llamada procomún en el mundo de Internet.
And we have a fourth form, which is in the world of Internet,
Procomún.
Procomún, no translation. Then common. Like Common Wiki Commons?
Or Creative Commons. Creative Commons y otras formas de propiedad en común.
Common property.
Que tiene mucha analogía con la propiedad comunitaria tradicional.
That it has many analogous forms to the community type of property.
Entonces, si definimos de un modo muy general lo público como lo que tenemos en común,
So if we define in a general sense the public as that which we have in common.
Es muy distinto si lo definimos con un criterio de copyright, de derechos de autor o de propiedad comunitaria.
It's very, very different if we define it in terms of copyright, in terms of author's rights, or in terms of a community property.
Y lo que está ocurriendo en el mundo actual es que hay una gran ofensiva internacional de las grandes corporaciones y de algunos organismos internacionales.
So what's going on right now is that there's a very big offensive going on from the part of the corporations and international
Para combatir la piratería.
To fight and combat piracy.
Y grandes masas de receptores, usuarios de las redes.
And huge amount of receptors in internet and the web.
Para los cuales no tiene sentido la palabra piratería.
For which the word piracy has no sense.
Porque la fascinación con el acceso es tal que lo que les importa es encontrar vías para trascender las fronteras que les quieren colocar.
Because the fascination with access is such that the impulse is to find ways to access and cross those barriers.
Y no hay ninguna evidencia de que una tendencia vaya a triunfar sobre la otra.
And there's no evidence that one tendency is going to triumph over the other.
Por eso digo que me parece que en este momento la pregunta no es cómo eliminar la piratería.
That's why what I would say is in this moment the question is not how to eliminate piracy.
Ni cómo eliminar el copyright.
Or how to eliminate copyright.
Sino cómo encontrar formas de convivencia.
But how to find simultaneous forms of these terms living together.
De estos movimientos que están impulsados por la propia innovación tecnológica y el acceso más abierto.
Of these movements that are propelled and impulsed by more open ways of terms of property. Yes. And I think we are out of time. So with that, I'm going to close this panel and thank you very much to our presenters. Thank you.